The sound of tearing silk cut through the murmur of the party like a gunshot. In the sudden silence, all eyes were on Eudora, standing on the stage next to her husband, Jasper, the billionaire titan. He looked down at the ruined bodice of her vintage dress, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Time for an upgrade," he whispered, for only her to hear. The crowd held its breath, expecting tears. A hasty retreat, a woman broken. They didn't know Eudora. They didn't see the ice forming in her eyes. She wasn't broken. She was being unleashed. What she did next wouldn't just end the party. It would detonate an empire. The morning of the party dawned with a sterile, oppressive perfection, much like Eudora's marriage. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Manhattan penthouse, glinted off surfaces so polished they seemed to hold no memory. For 5 years, Eudora had lived within these walls, a beautiful object placed just so in the grand museum of Jasper Croft's life. Jasper was a man carved from ambition and old money, the CEO of Croft Holdings, a global real estate empire he'd inherited and expanded with ruthless precision. He moved through the world as if he owned it, and in many ways he did. He had certainly come to own her. "You're wearing that?" he asked, his voice devoid of curiosity. He didn't look up from the tablet, displaying a stream of stock market data. He was already dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, looking less like a man getting ready for a party, and more like a predator preparing for a hunt. Eudora looked down at the dress laid out on their king-sized bed. It was a deep emerald silk, a vintage piece from the 1950s that she had painstakingly restored herself. It had belonged to her grandmother, a woman of quiet strength and artistic spirit, everything Eudora felt she was losing. "I love this dress," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "It's old, Eudora. It looks sentimental. This party is about the future, not the past." He finally looked at her, his steel-grey eyes performing a swift, dismissive calculation. "Wear the diamond necklace I bought you in Geneva, and the blue gown, the one from Chanel." The blue gown was his choice, a beautiful but cold garment that made her feel like a mannequin. The diamonds were heavy, a glittering collar that always felt more like a leash. The party he'd told her was to celebrate the launch of the Olympus project, his most audacious venture, yet a multi-billion-dollar luxury development set to redefine the city's skyline. But Eudora knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that it was more than that. The air in their home had been thick with secrets for months. His phone buzzed on the marble nightstand, the screen lighting up. He was careless, so assured of her submission that he didn't even bother to hide it. A name flashed for a fraction of a second before he swiped it away: Isabella. A cold knot tightened in Eudora's stomach. It wasn't the first time she'd seen the name. There had been late-night texts he claimed were international business, a lingering scent of a perfume that wasn't hers on his suit jackets, amouage, a scent far too bold for Eudora's preference for subtle florals. "Who's Isabella?" she asked, the words tasting like glass. Jasper's focus didn't waver from his screen. "Isabella Ricci. She's the CEO of Ricci Innovations, a key investor in the Olympus project. You'll meet her tonight. Be polite." The casualness of his lie was more painful than a slap. Eudora had seen the whispers in the society pages, the speculative articles about the power partnership between Croft and Ricci. They called Isabella a visionary, a firebrand, a woman who matched Jasper's ambition. They never mentioned Jasper's wife. In their world, Eudora was becoming invisible. She walked into the cavernous closet, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet. She ignored the blue Chanel gown and reached for her emerald dress. As she slipped the cool silk over her skin, it felt like armor. It was a small act of defiance, perhaps the only one she had left. As she fastened the delicate buttons at her back, she thought of her father. He had been a brilliant architect, a man of integrity, who had warned her about Jasper. "He doesn't see a partner, Ellie," he had said before he passed away. "He sees an acquisition." She hadn't listened, blinded by Jasper's charm and the dizzying world he offered. Later, as they stood by the door waiting for the elevator, Jasper's eyes finally landed on her dress. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "I see you decided to ignore my advice. It's just a dress, Jasper." "Nothing is just a dress, Eudora," he corrected, his tone sharp. "Everything is a message. That dress says you're clinging to the past. Tonight I need you to represent my future." He reached out and adjusted her strap, his touch cold and proprietary. "Just smile, look beautiful, and don't say anything important. Can you manage that?" As the elevator doors opened, she met his gaze in the mirrored surface. Her reflection looked pale, a ghost in a green dress. But behind the fear in her eyes, a tiny ember of anger began to glow. She had been a ghost in her own life for too long. Tonight, something had to change. She just didn't yet know that Jasper himself would provide the match to set her world on fire. The party was being held at the observatory, a triple-height event space on the 90th floor of a skyscraper Jasper's company owned. The views were breathtaking, the city lights, a sprawling galaxy of diamonds below. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved through the throng of guests with trays of champagne and impossibly intricate canapes. The air hummed with power, the collective murmur of the city's elite bankers, politicians, tech moguls, and socialites. Eudora played her part as she always did. A serene smile fixed on her face, a champagne flute held delicately in her hand. She was the perfect hostess, the gracious wife nodding and murmuring pleasantries while feeling utterly disconnected, as if she were watching a film of her own life. Jasper left her side almost immediately, drawn into the magnetic center of the room. And there, waiting for him, was Isabella Ricci. Seeing her in person was like being struck by lightning. Isabella was everything the articles promised, tall, raven-haired, with eyes that missed nothing, and a smile that was both dazzling and predatory. She wore a crimson gown that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, confident slash of color in the sea of muted tones. She and Jasper looked like a matched set, two perfectly honed weapons of industry. Eudora watched them from across the room. She saw the way Jasper's hand rested on the small of Isabella's back, a gesture of casual intimacy that was more damning than a kiss. She saw the way they leaned in to speak, their heads close together, sharing secrets in a room full of people. They were a team, and Eudora was the inconvenient secret that hadn't yet been disposed of. Feeling a wave of nausea, she excused herself and made her way toward the powder room, needing a moment to breathe. As she passed a secluded alcove, she heard familiar voices. It was two of the board members' wives' women, who had always treated her with a cloying, condescending sweetness. "Can't believe he brought her here tonight," one of them, Beatrice, whispered. "It's one thing to have a bit on the side, but to parade her in front of everyone. And his wife, it's just cruel." "Jasper doesn't care about cruelty. He cares about power," the other Margaret replied. "Isabella Ricci isn't just a fling. Her company's tech is the entire backbone of the Olympus project. He needs her, and from the looks of it, he wants her too. I heard he's already had the lawyers draft the divorce papers. The announcement is imminent. Poor Eudora. She's a sweet girl, but she was never in his league. She's artistic. Jasper needs a killer. The word struck Eudora with physical force. Divorce papers. The world tilted, the ambient noise of the party fading to a dull roar in her ears. She leaned against the cold wall, steadying herself. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a pre-written ending to her story, an ending in which she was simply edited out. She returned to the party, but something inside her had irrevocably shifted. The shock was crystallizing into a cold, hard clarity. She looked at the powerful people in the room, the ones who smiled at her with pity, and she realized they were not her judges. They were just an audience. Her eyes found her best friend Chloe, a sharp-witted journalist who had navigated her way into the event. Chloe met her gaze from across the room, and her smile faltered, replaced by a look of concern. She knew Eudora too well. With a subtle nod, Chloe began to move toward her. "I need to get into Jasper's office," Eudora whispered urgently when Chloe reached her side. "His private office. Here in this building." Chloe's eyes widened. "Ellie, what's going on? They're not just having an affair. He's leaving me. The women in the bathroom said the divorce papers are already drawn up. I need to know. I need to see it for myself." Chloe, ever the pragmatist, didn't waste time with platitudes. "His office is on the 92nd floor. The executive elevator needs a key card, but the service elevator might be our best bet. I'll create a distraction." 5 minutes later, a loud crash echoed from the bar area as Chloe, with theatrical clumsiness, tripped into a waiter, sending a pyramid of champagne flutes cascading to the floor. As all eyes turned to the commotion, Eudora slipped away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found the service corridor, a stark, utilitarian space that was a world away from the opulence of the party. The service elevator whirred to life, carrying her 2 floors up. The 92nd floor was dark and silent, a ghost town of executive power. Jasper's office was at the end of the hall, a corner suite with glass walls overlooking the city. The door was locked. Panic seized her for a moment, but then she remembered the emergency code he used for everything his father's birthday. She punched in the numbers. The lock clicked open. The office was a monument to Jasper's ego, a massive mahogany desk, abstract art that cost more than a house and a faint scent of his expensive cologne. She went straight to the desk. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she would know it when she saw it. In the bottom drawer beneath a stack of blueprints was a locked leather portfolio. Her hands trembled as she tried the same code. It opened. Inside, nestled between financial projections for the Olympus project, was a thick folder from Jasper's personal attorney. The first document was a draft of a divorce settlement. It was brutal. It cited a non-disclosure agreement she'd signed years ago, offering her a pittance to walk away quietly and disappear. The second document was a prenuptial agreement. But it wasn't for her. It was for Jasper Croft and Isabella Ricci. But then she saw it. Tucked behind the legal documents was another set of papers, something that didn't belong. It was a separate ledger detailing a series of wire transfers. Money was being moved from Croft Holdings' main pension fund into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The same shell corporation that was providing the initial undisclosed funding for the Olympus project. He wasn't just replacing his wife. He was stealing from his own employees to fund his new empire with his new queen. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it stole her breath away. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a federal crime. Her phone buzzed. It was Chloe. "They're starting the speeches. He's looking for you." Eudora took out her phone. With shaking hands, she photographed every single page of the ledger, every damning transfer, every illegal transaction. She sent the files to a secure encrypted email account she'd created years ago and never used. As she placed the portfolio back in the drawer, she saw her reflection in the dark glass of the window. The frightened, heartbroken woman was gone. In her place was someone she barely recognized. Her eyes were dark with a purpose she had never known. Jasper had made a fatal mistake. He thought he was married to a piece of art, fragile, beautiful, and silent. He was about to find out he was married to a woman who now had the power to burn his world to the ground. Returning to the party was one of the hardest things Eudora had ever done. The elevator ride down felt like a descent from the cold, clear heights of truth back into the perfumed deception of the gala. Every smile directed at her felt like a lie, every polite inquiry a veiled insult. But the evidence on her phone was a physical weight in her purse, a secret power that steadied her nerves. Jasper found her near the grand staircase, his face a mask of irritation. "Where have you been?" "The speeches are starting. I'm about to announce the final funding partner." He glanced at Isabella, who stood a few feet away, radiating triumphant confidence. "This is the most important night of my career, Eudora. Try to look happy for me." The condescension in his voice, which once would have made her shrink, now fanned the flames of her rage. She gave him a slow, serene smile. "Of course, Jasper. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Her calmness seemed to unnerve him more than tears would have. He watched her for a moment, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, before turning and striding toward the small stage that had been set up at the front of the room. Eudora knew she couldn't do this alone. Exposing Jasper required more than just evidence. It required a strategy. There was only one person she could trust, a man who despised Jasper's brand of corporate corruption as much as her own father had Arthur Vance. Arthur was a legend, figure in the city's financial landscape, a former titan of industry who had served on the Croft Holdings board for decades out of loyalty to Jasper's father. He had retired a few years ago after a bitter falling out with Jasper over his aggressive, ethically questionable business practices. Arthur had always been kind to Eudora, seeing in her a reflection of the integrity her father had possessed. She found him by the windows observing the party with a look of weary disdain. He was an older man, with a shock of white hair and eyes that had seen everything. "Arthur," she said, her voice low, "I need your help." He turned, and his expression softened when he saw her. "Eudora, my dear, I was sorry to hear about your father. This must be difficult for you." "It's more difficult than you know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Jasper is not the man you think he is. He's not even the man his father was." Arthur gave a short, humorless laugh. "I am well aware of that. Jasper has the ambition of his father, but none of the honor. What has he done?" There, in the relative quiet of the corner, Eudora told him everything. She spoke of the affair, the divorce papers, and then the financial fraud. She showed him the photographs on her phone. As he scrolled through the images of the ledger, his face grew darker and darker, his jaw tightening with a cold fury. "The pension fund," he whispered, his voice thick with disgust. "He's gutting the employees' retirement to fund this vanity project. He's leveraging the futures of thousands of families for his own glory. This is monstrous. I know, Eudora said, but I don't know what to do. If I go to the press, his lawyers will bury me. If I confront him, he'll destroy me. Arthur looked from the phone back to her face, and for the first time that night, Eudora saw not pity, but profound respect in someone's eyes. You have your father's courage, Eudora, and his intelligence. You haven't come to me for tears. You've come to me for a weapon. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Jasper, who was now laughing with a group of investors. Jasper's greatest weakness, Arthur said, is his arrogance. He believes he is untouchable. He needs to be brought down, not in a quiet boardroom, but in front of the very people whose admiration he craves. He needs to be publicly humiliated. A plan began to form between them, spoken in urgent, hushed tones. Arthur knew the inner workings of the company, the key players, the regulatory bodies. He knew exactly which investors in the room had the most to lose and who would turn on Jasper the fastest. He's going to make a grand speech, Arthur strategized. He will praise his own genius, and then I suspect he will announce Isabella Ricci not just as a partner, but as the cornerstone of his new vision. That's his moment of triumph, and that is when you will strike. How? Eudora asked, her heart racing. He will try to silence you, but I will make a call. The evidence you have is enough for the SEC to act. By the time you're done speaking, it will be too late for him to spin the narrative. The truth will be out. He gave her a firm, reassuring look. But you must be the one to deliver the blow. It has to be you. The idea was terrifying. To stand up in front of this powerful crowd, to confront the man who had controlled her life for so long, it seemed impossible. But then she thought of the quiet dignity of her father, the stolen futures of the Croft employees, and the cold, smug certainty on Isabella's face. The fear didn't vanish, but it was eclipsed by a powerful, righteous anger. He's going to call me to the stage, Eudora said, a sudden, chilling premonition washing over her. He'll do it, to make a point, to show me off one last time, before he discards me. Then let him, Arthur said, his voice grim. Let him set his own stage for his own execution. He squeezed her hand. Go on now. Let him think you are the dutiful, silent wife. Let him underestimate you one last time. It will be the last mistake he ever makes. Eudora nodded, taking a deep breath. She felt as though she were preparing for battle. As she turned back toward the center of the room, she smoothed down her emerald dress, the dress he hated, the dress that represented her past. But she would wear it as she secured her future. It was no longer just a dress. It was her banner. The lights in the observatory dimmed, and a single spotlight focused on the stage. A hush fell over the crowd as Jasper Croft, radiating charisma, stepped up to the microphone. He looked every inch the conquering hero, the master of the universe. Friends, colleagues, visionaries. His voice boomed, smooth and confident. Thank you for joining me on this monumental evening. We are not just here tonight to celebrate a building of steel and glass. We are here to celebrate a new future for this city. A future we are building together. The Olympus Project is more than a name. It is a promise of innovation, luxury, and unparalleled vision. Eudora stood near the edge of the crowd, Chloe at her side, for moral support. Arthur, a discreet but solid presence a few feet away. She watched Jasper, this man she had once loved, and felt nothing but a profound, icy distance. He was a stranger performing a well-rehearsed role. He spoke for 10 minutes, weaving a grand narrative of ambition and success. He thanked his board, his investors, the city officials who had greased the wheels for his project. It was a masterclass in public relations, full of soaring rhetoric and carefully crafted humility. Eudora could feel the energy in the room building, the guests captivated by his performance. They believed him. They were investing in him, in his vision. "But a vision," Jasper continued, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "is nothing without the right partners. It requires shedding the old, the sentimental, the things that hold us back, and embracing a future that is bold, dynamic, and fearless." His eyes swept the room and landed directly on Eudora. Her heart gave a painful thud. This was it. The public dismissal couched in the language of progress. "And of course," he said with a practiced smile, "a man's vision is supported by those closest to him. I'd like to ask my wife Eudora to join me on stage." A polite, scattered applause rippled through the room. Chloe squeezed her arm. "You can do this," she whispered fiercely. Walking towards the stage felt like moving through water. Every eye was on her, and she could feel their pity, their curiosity. She held her head high, her steps measured and deliberate. As she reached the stage, Jasper took her hand. His grip was like iron, his smile a rictus of false affection. "My beautiful wife Eudora," he said to the crowd, keeping her hand in his. "A talented artist, a lover of history, a reminder of where we've been." The subtext was clear to everyone who knew the rumors. He was framing her as the past, a relic to be honored before being put away. He then turned his attention to the other side of the stage. "And now I want to introduce the future, the driving force behind the technology that will make Olympus a living, breathing entity. A true visionary, a leader and a partner in every sense of the word. Please welcome the brilliant CEO of Ricci Innovations, Isabella Ricci." The applause was thunderous as Isabella ascended the stage, a vision in crimson. She moved with the fluid grace of a panther, her eyes shining with triumph. She shook Jasper's hand, but her gaze flickered to Eudora, a small, victorious smirk playing on her lips. She was so sure she had won. The three of them stood on the stage, the husband, the wife, and the mistress, a perfect volatile tableau of betrayal. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Jasper raised his champagne glass, "And so I want to propose a toast, not just to the Olympus project, but to new beginnings, to the future, to the partnerships that will define it." He clinked his glass with Isabella's. As an afterthought, he turned to Eudora, who stood frozen beside him. He gestured for her to raise her glass. She didn't move. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He leaned in his voice, a venomous whisper meant only for her. "Play your part, Eudora. One last time." She finally met his eyes, and what he saw there seemed to startle him. There was no fear, no pain, only a calm, chilling stillness. He continued to smile for the crowd, but his grip on her arm tightened. He was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. He needed to re-establish his dominance, to put her back in her place, one final time. With a theatrical, charming laugh, he said to the audience, "My wife is so overcome with emotion. She's speechless." He turned to her, his smile never wavering. "Let's give her a hand, shall we?" He began to applaud, and as he brought his hands together, he deliberately hooked his expensive shoe on the delicate, decades-old hem of her emerald dress. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. A slight snag. But Jasper didn't stop. As he took a small, calculated step back, still applauding his own cruel joke, He put his full weight on the fabric. Eudora felt the pull, a sharp, violent tug at her waist. And then came the sound. It was not loud, but in the expectant silence of the room, it was utterly obscene. A dry, rasping rip, the sound of silk lovingly preserved for over 70 years giving way. It tore from the hem all the way up to her hip, the vintage fabric surrendering with a finality that echoed the destruction of her marriage. A collective gasp swept through the observatory. The polite smiles froze on the faces of the guests. The applause died instantly. Everyone stared mesmerized by the quiet horror of the moment. The emerald dress, her armor, her banner hung in tatters around her, a jagged line of ruin exposing her leg from ankle to thigh. Isabella Ricci's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of shock, and beneath it, a sliver of smug satisfaction. This was the ultimate humiliation, a public branding of Eudora, as used, discarded, and broken. Jasper looked down at the torn dress, then back up at Eudora's face. The charming mask fell away for a second, revealing the naked contempt beneath. He leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear, his whisper a drop of pure poison. "See, I told you that old thing was fragile. Time for something new." He expected her to crumble. He expected tears, a choked sob, a hurried, shameful exit from the stage, leaving him and Isabella as the victors. It was the scene he had written in his mind, the perfect, brutal end to their chapter. But Eudora did not cry. She did not run. She stood perfectly still for a long moment, the torn silk fluttering around her in the conditioned air. She looked down at the ruined dress, the last tangible piece of her grandmother of her past. A profound and terrible calm settled over her. Jasper hadn't just torn a piece of fabric. He had torn away the last vestiges of the timid, compliant woman she used to be. He had ripped open the cage, and now she was free. A slow, deliberate smile touched her lips. It was a terrifying smile, holding no warmth, no humor. It was the smile of a person who had absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The crowd watched, utterly bewildered by her reaction. Jasper's smirk faltered. This was not in his script. He had expected a victim. He was facing a survivor. Her eyes clear and cold as ice lifted from the wreckage of her dress and met his. She saw him for what he was, not a titan, not a king, but a petty, insecure man whose power was built on the humiliation of others. Without breaking eye contact with him, she reached over and took the microphone from its stand. Her hand was perfectly steady. The weight of it felt solid, real. It was a conduit for the voice he had tried so hard to silence. The room was so quiet that the faint hum of the building's ventilation system was audible. Jasper took a step toward her, his face darkening with rage. "Eudora, what do you think you're doing?" he hissed. She ignored him. She turned to face the hundreds of stunned guests, her gaze sweeping across their faces. She saw their shock, their pity, their morbid curiosity. She held the microphone to her lips. Her voice, when it came, was not a whisper or a scream. It was clear, steady and resonant, carrying to every corner of the silent room. "My husband is right," she began the words, cutting through the tension. "It is time for something new, and it's important to be honest about what we're celebrating tonight." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Jasper's face had gone pale. Isabella watched her with narrowed, suddenly anxious eyes. "This isn't just a launch party for the Olympus project," Eudora continued, her voice gaining strength. "It's also an engagement party." A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the audience. She let them wonder for a moment, building the suspense. Then she turned her head slightly, her gaze falling first on her husband, then moving deliberately coldly to the woman in the crimson dress standing beside him. "An engagement party for my husband, Jasper Croft," she said, her voice dropping for the final devastating blow. "And his mistress, Isabella Ricci." The two names, Jasper Croft and Isabella Ricci, hung in the air, woven together not in a toast, but in an indictment. For a split second, the universe of the party held its breath, suspended in disbelief. Then the silence shattered. It wasn't a gradual murmur. It was an instantaneous explosion of sound. 100 private conversations erupted at once, a cacophony of gasps, shocked whispers, and nervous laughter, as guests turned to one another, their eyes wide. The atmosphere, once thick with champagne-fueled adulation, was now electric with scandal. Isabella's carefully constructed composure disintegrated. The blood drained from her face, leaving her crimson dress to mock her deathly pallor. Her hand, which had been resting confidently on her hip, flew to her throat in a gesture of pure instinctual panic. This was not how her victory was supposed to look. She was supposed to be anointed, not accused. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but she was trapped on stage, pinned by the gazes of 1,000 eyes. Jasper, reacting with the feral speed of a cornered predator, lunged for the microphone. His face, moments before a portrait of smug success, was now a twisted mask of incandescent rage. "That's enough, Eudora," he snarled, his voice a low growl that was still audible to those nearby. "Security, get her off the stage. She's hysterical." Eudora sidestepped his clumsy grab with a dancer's grace, her body moving with a fluid purpose that belied the tatters of her dress. She held the microphone firmly, her knuckles white, and met his fury with an unnerving calm. She leaned into the mic, her voice cutting cleanly through the rising chaos. "Hysterical," she repeated the single word, dripping with irony. The crowd quieted again, eager for the next act of this unforeseen drama. "It's a convenient word, isn't it? The one men like you have always used to silence women who speak a truth you don't want to hear." She turned her gaze from her husband to the sea of fascinated, horrified faces. "I assure you all I am not hysterical. I have never been more clear-headed in my entire life. I am simply finished with the lies." She let that statement settle a promise of more revelations to come. Jasper stood frozen, his powerlessness in this moment a stark and foreign feeling. He was used to commanding rooms not being a prisoner within them. "You all stand here tonight," Eudora continued, her voice resonating with a newfound steely authority, "ready to invest your millions in this man's vision. You celebrate his audacity. But do you know what this grand vision is truly built upon? It's not built on genius. It's built on theft." The word theft landed with the force of a physical blow. The investors in the crowd, men and women who managed billions of dollars, stiffened. This was no longer just a juicy marital dispute. It was an attack on the very foundation of their world money. The Olympus project isn't just being funded by legitimate capital. She declared, her eyes scanning the front rows, picking out the faces of the key financial backers. Its seed money, its very foundation, was stolen. It was taken from the people you never see, from the secretaries who manage your calendars, from the janitors who clean your offices after you've gone home, from the construction crews who have risked their lives building this city for 40 years. It was stolen from the Croft Holdings Employee Pension Fund. An audible wave of shock rolled through the room. This was an accusation of such magnitude, so utterly ruinous that it seemed impossible. Yet the conviction in Eudora's voice was absolute. He created a shell corporation. She went on, her delivery precise and damning. A phantom company called Aegis Development Group, conveniently registered in the Cayman Islands, where secrets are easy to keep. Over the last 18 months, my husband has illegally siphoned more than $90 million from the retirement accounts of his own loyal workers. He is gambling their futures, their hopes for a dignified old age, to build this glass monument to his own ego. Jasper finally found his voice, shouting over her lies. These are the desperate, pathetic lies of a scorned woman. But his denials were drowned out by the rising tide of panic. An investor in the front row, a notoriously ruthless hedge fund manager named Marcus Thorne, bellowed, "Answer the question, Croft. Is this true? Did you use the pension funds?" Before Jasper could formulate a response, a calm, authoritative voice spoke from the edge of the crowd. Arthur Vance, his white hair gleaming in the spotlight's glare, stepped forward. Every head turned towards him. His reputation for integrity was legendary, his word as good as gold. "She is telling the truth," Arthur stated, his voice steady and grave. The room fell into a dead silence. As a former board member with oversight privileges, I was alerted to certain discrepancies. What Eudora has uncovered is horrifyingly accurate. The evidence is irrefutable, and I have already taken the liberty of forwarding a complete file to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the District Attorney's Office. It was a death sentence. The mention of the SEC was the final nail in the coffin. Chaos erupted anew, but this time it was laced with fear. Investors were scrambling, pulling out their phones, furiously texting their lawyers and brokers. Shouts of "fraud" and "I'm ruined" echoed through the opulent hall. The party was over. The feeding frenzy had begun. Amid the pandemonium, Eudora had one last piece of business. Her gaze moved from Jasper's ashen face to Isabella, who was trying to inch away from the stage to melt back into the crowd like a phantom. "And you, Isabella!" Eudora's voice rang out, a final piercing note that froze the other woman in place. Isabella turned slowly, her face a mask of pure terror. "Don't think you're just the other woman in this story. Your innovative company's initial investment was the first installment of that stolen money laundered through your accounts. You knew exactly where the money was coming from. You're not just a mistress, you're a co-conspirator." Isabella visibly flinched, as if she had been physically struck. Her career, her reputation, her entire life's work, all of it incinerated in that single public accusation. Eudora looked at the carnage she had wrought, at Jasper surrounded by a mob of his furious, betrayed investors, at Isabella standing utterly alone, a pariah in a blood-red dress. She felt a profound, quiet sense of justice. Her work was done. She let the microphone fall from her hand. It hit the stage with a heavy, resonant thud that seemed to punctuate the end of an era. With the tatters of her emerald dress trailing behind her, like the flag of a victorious, weary warrior, she walked to the edge of the stage and descended the steps. The crowd, a chaotic swirl of panic and fury, just moments before, parted for her. They stared at her with a new expression, a mixture of shock, awe, and perhaps even fear. She was no longer the pitiable wife. She was an avenging force of nature. She met no one's eye, her head held high, her back straight. She walked through the grand ballroom, past the half-empty glasses of champagne and the fallen canapes, a silent, graceful figure moving through the ruins she had created. As the enormous glass doors of the observatory hissed open before her, she stepped out into the quiet of the lobby, the sounds of chaos fading behind her. And through the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, she saw them a silent, synchronized ballet of flashing red and blue lights ascending the avenue far below. The law was coming for Jasper Croft. The reckoning was complete. The implosion of Jasper Croft's world was not a quiet affair. It was a public spectacle of breathtaking proportions. The story became the city's obsession, a modern-day morality play, served up in daily installments by a ravenous media. Eudora, in the taxi she had hailed in a daze, saw the first news vans screaming towards the skyscraper as she was speeding away from it. She didn't look back. Her reflection in the window showed a woman in a ruined dress. Her face pale, but her eyes burning with a terrible newfound clarity. By the time her flight to Florence was ascending over the Atlantic, the name Eudora Croft was on the lips of millions transformed overnight, from a footnote in society pages to the heroine or villain depending on the headline of a corporate drama. She landed in Italy, a ghost deliberately untethering herself from the life that had nearly suffocated her. She didn't watch the news or read the papers, but the fallout was impossible to escape entirely. Headlines screamed from newsstands. She passed on her way to the market. Croft CEO arrested for pension fraud. The all caps a testament to the scale of his hubris. Another showed a grainy photo of Isabella Ricci being escorted from her office by federal agents, her face a mask of disbelief. The mistress and the millions. Ricci Innovations implicated. The Olympus project, once hailed as Jasper's magnum opus, became a tombstone, a half-started construction site entangled in litigation and ruin. For Eudora, Florence was a sanctuary. She rented a small, airy apartment in the Oltrarno district, a place with terracotta floors and a balcony that overlooked a jumble of ancient rooftops. Here, the only empire that mattered was the one built by the Medici, the only scandal centuries old, immortalized in marble and oil paint. The first few weeks were a blur of sleep and silence. The adrenaline that had carried her through that night finally receded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. She was unlearning the constant low-level fear she had lived with for years, teaching her muscles to unclench her breathing, to deepen. Slowly, she began to emerge. Her days found a new rhythm, dictated not by a social calendar, but by her own soul's quiet longing. She would wake with the morning sun, buy fresh bread and peaches from a local market, and then lose herself in the city. She spent hours in the Uffizi Gallery, sitting before Botticelli's Primavera, not as an art historian analyzing technique, but as a woman relearning the language of beauty and grace. She rediscovered the simple, profound joy of her passion. In the quiet halls of the Laurentian Library, surrounded by Michelangelo's architecture and the scent of ancient paper, she felt a connection to something larger and more enduring than Jasper's fleeting fragile power. She was not Jasper Croft's wife. She was Eudora, a scholar, a lover of art, a person whole and separate. The trial was a distant storm she monitored from the calm of her Florentine haven. Sitting in a small cafe, the aroma of espresso mingling with the sweet Tuscan air, she would read the updates on a small laptop. She read about Jasper's arrogance in the courtroom, his attempts to paint her as an unstable, vengeful liar. But the evidence was irrefutable, a cold, hard chain of numbers and transactions that told a story of greed and betrayal no lawyer could spin. When the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, a sentence of 20 years in federal prison, Eudora felt no surge of triumph, no satisfying thirst for vengeance quenched. There was only a quiet, somber finality. It was the closing of a heavy book, its last page written. She closed her laptop, paid for her coffee, and walked to the Arno River. Feeling the sun on her face, a free woman. Months later, a thick envelope forwarded by her discreet lawyer in New York arrived at her post office box. She recognized Jasper's aggressive, slanting handwriting immediately. Her first instinct was to throw it unread into the river. But she knew she had to face this last ghost. Sitting on a stone bench in the Bobol de Boli Gardens, surrounded by the scent of roses and cypress, she slit it open. The letter was 12 pages of undiluted narcissism. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, a testament to a man utterly incapable of introspection. He never once apologized. Instead, he blamed her, the bored Arthur Vance, the jealous media. He wrote of his own suffering in prison, the indignity of it all. He recounted their early days together, twisting shared memories into a narrative of her inadequacy and his generosity. The final pages were the most delusional, a desperate, pathetic plea for her to use her newfound fame to advocate for him, to help him appeal, to tell the world it was all a terrible mistake. "We were a team, Ellie," he wrote. "You owe me this." Eudora read the last line, and a small, humorless laugh escaped her lips. He still didn't get it. He never would. He saw her not as a human being he had wounded, but as a possession that had rebelled. She carefully folded the letter, walked to the Ponte Vecchio as the sun began to set, and lit a corner of the pages with a match. She held it until the flames nearly licked her fingertips, then dropped the burning curling paper into the river below. She watched as the last glowing embers hissed and vanished into the dark, flowing water, taking the final remnants of her past life with them. 2 years after that night, London was a city alive with a crisp autumn energy. In a chic, minimalist gallery in the Mayfair district, Eudora was the center of a captivated audience. The Gallery Provenance was hers. She had built it from the ground up, pouring her inheritance and her soul into creating a space renowned for its integrity and expertise in authenticating and restoring historical art. She moved with an easy, understated confidence, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, her only jewelry, a pair of pearl earrings her father had given her. She was speaking to a small group of clients about a 17th century painting her firm had just rescued from obscurity. Her voice was passionate, her knowledge encyclopedic, her love for her work radiating from her. A man at the edge of the group watched her, his expression one of quiet admiration. He was an architect in town for a conference who had wandered in, drawn by the painting in the window. When her talk concluded, he approached her, his smile gentle and unassuming. "What you do is amazing," he said, his eyes meeting hers directly. "You don't just restore paintings, you bring stories back to life." Eudora met his gaze and offered a genuine, unguarded smile, a smile that reached her eyes. "I believe every piece of art has a soul," she replied, her voice soft but sure. "Sometimes it just gets buried under layers of dirt and neglect. It just needs to be carefully uncovered." As she spoke the words, she felt their profound personal truth. She, too, had been buried, obscured under the weight of a gilded cage. But she had done the painstaking work. She had chipped away at the lies, cleaned away the fear, and restored the vibrant, strong, and brilliant woman who had been there all along. The architect saw a woman who ran a beautiful gallery. But Eudora knew the truth. Her life itself was her greatest restoration project. And it was finally a masterpiece. Eudora's story is a powerful reminder that the most devastating betrayals can sometimes forge the most unbreakable strength. She walked into that party as a forgotten wife and walked out as the architect of her own liberation. Her journey shows us that true power isn't found in wealth or status, but in the courage to speak the truth, even when your voice shakes. She proved that dignity is the one jewel that can never be bought or torn away. If you were moved by Eudora's incredible story of justice and rebirth, please show your support by hitting that like button. For more stories of karma resilience and the indomitable human spirit, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. What did you think of Jasper's public downfall? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Thank you for listening.